Dr. Tom Seager is big into the cold therapy, and that is something that I have honestly not been excited to participate in and have pushed it off for a long time, but I am really starting to buy in to the health benefits and incorporating this into more of a daily routine. Dr. Seager, I am so excited to be visiting with you. Your work has made an impact, and as I'm trying to learn more and incorporate more of cold therapy and understand that from a metabolic side, especially with my emphasis on cancer, I wanted to visit with you and give you the floor to go into a lot of this incredible work. You've got quite the story in going from engineering to metabolic health. So if you would give us that introduction to who you are, and then I just want to dive in to cold.
Thanks for having me here, Logan. I'd be happy to. For me, my interest in metabolism started when I was a doctoral student in engineering because I was a dad and my son was 6 years old and he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And this was 2001, like long before continuous glucose monitors and long before insulin pumps. We had to prick his finger, check his glucose, draw up his insulin in a syringe and inject it into the back of his arm was his preferred location. And you got to imagine, he was so tiny. It was a surprise to me because I just thought he was sick. You know, it was the winter time and we were up in northern New York where I went to grad school at Clarkson University. And when I got him to the hospital, I didn't know what was going on until our pediatrician handed me an orange and a syringe and some vials of insulin. He said, "Your son has diabetes. Your life is going to change. No one leaves this hospital until you figure it out." And so I was determined to figure it out because it felt to me like my son's life depended upon this technical problem of me being able to manage his blood sugars with him. We kept scrupulous notes, journals, exercise, eating, insulin dose, everything. And it slowly dawned on me and my wife and the whole family that most of what the American Diabetes Association was telling us, most of what the nutritionists and the dietitians and the endocrinologists were telling us was just wrong. We had to figure it out for ourselves because there is no amount of insulin that can prevent a blood sugar spike in a 6-year-old eating an Oreo cookie. You know, just as an example. And they would tell us, oh, he can have whatever he wants. It's fine. You just have to, give him enough insulin for it. And I didn't trust that advice because I had the data that showed, yes, protein can result in a blood sugar spike. It takes hours. But I didn't understand the mechanisms until I did the research. How does insulin work? What is gluconeogenesis? What's happening inside my son's body? And it changed our whole approach to nutrition. Well, then you got to fast forward a couple of decades because the kids are grown now. And I'm an associate professor of engineering at Arizona State. This goes back maybe 5 or 6 years, but I'm separating from my wife. It happens. Sometimes marriages have to go through stages. And the reason we got married is so we could have kids, raise a family. And when our youngest graduated from high school, we needed a new vision of our marriage, and her ideas, my ideas, they were different. So we separated, and I'm going out on the dating market, and I got fat, Logan. Like that whole 20 years, I was so focused on my kids' health that I'd neglected my own. I was almost 250 pounds and I had to do something about it. So I, started exercising. I quit alcohol and I took the carbs out and I'm doing cold showers because I think they're going to make me tough. And that was working pretty well. I got down to about 215. And then I said, well, I got to get the blood panel. Like if I'm going to keep making progress, I got to know what's going on in my body. And I got the whole male health panel. And nothing really jumped out except my PSA. So this is the prostate specific antigen, and it was elevated. And Logan, I didn't really know what that meant, but so much had changed, in the 20 years since my son's diagnosis and since I got this lab. Now you can go to the internet. Now, we have broadband, everything. And now it's really easy to research these things. The problem with doing your own research is that you start reading articles that scare the hell out of you. And that's what happened to me. Like in my imagination, I had prostate cancer and I was going to die. I was 52 years old. My PSA was 7, which is higher than normal and is associated with an increased risk of prostate cancer. But all it means is you have an inflamed prostate. And here's what you're supposed to do. Go to your urologist, get a prostate exam. And if your doctor recommends it, get a biopsy. And if the biopsy comes back positive, then have a prostatectomy or maybe radiation treatment. There's this whole cascade, and this is what you're supposed to do. But Logan, I was reading more about prostatectomy, and I didn't like it. And some of what I'd learned about diabetes, that distrust that I had developed over years of saying, well, that's not right, and that's not right, it stuck with me when I was thinking about the prostate. I said, before I'm going to the doctor, I'm going to talk to other men. And the stories they told me were horrific. So these were biopsies gone bad that lead to sepsis infection or false positives. One guy who was younger than me, he had a prostatectomy. And of course, he suffered from incontinence, which eventually resolved, but he still can't get an erection. And remember, in my imagination, I'm a single guy. I'm trying to I'm trying to date. I'm like, what woman is ever going to love me, Logan, if I can't ever get an erection? So I'm scared shitless. And the last thing I'm going to do is go talk to an endocrinologist. I said to myself, I'm going to do keto and I'm going to do ice baths. And that's when I got really serious about it. I bought a chest freezer. It was no more cold showers for me. And I'm getting in there. My former student, Jason Stauffer, and I, we had been doing the ice baths, and we were getting sick of buying all that ice. And in Phoenix, it's really hot and the ice only lasts 10 minutes. We said, we ought to be able to invent something, right? So we did. That was the origin of Morozko. We put together the refrigeration and the stock tank, and then I got rid of the chest freezer and I put a Morozko on my porch. I did this every day and my PSA came down. So instead of doing the conventional medical thing, and cold is really good for inflammation. And so I did the keto in and out. I did the ice baths. My PSA came down to about 1. And I'm like, look at this. I'm not at risk anymore. I'm doing the whole blood work. I'm just ordering these blood panels myself because you can do this in Arizona. And my testosterone went through the roof. So before I started this regimen of keto and ice baths, I was in the 700s, which any doctor would say, hey, you're an obese 52-year-old. You're doing great. 700s. That's a lot of testosterone for you. But I went up to 1180. And so the PSA, it was no longer flagged on the lab report, but the testosterone was out of range, too high. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. That's not what I was going for, but accidentally that I boosted my testosterone. So I'm going back to the library. It turns out that there is a study in 1991, Sakamoto et al. They took these young guys in Japan and they said, first, we're going to do exercise. So this was an exercise bike. And then we're going to do cold, like everybody does it. You use the ice bath to recover from your workout. Their testosterone went way down. But then they reversed it for some reason. They did the cold stimulation, and it was just a forearm, in a bowl of water. It wasn't even the whole bath. And then they did 20 minutes on the exercise bike. Testosterone went way up. And I'm like, I think that's what happened to me. I was doing the ice bath. I would get out. I would be cold as hell. I wasn't doing it to recover from a workout. I was doing it because I was scared I had prostate cancer. So I'd come out, I'd be cold, and I'm going to do some pull-ups or some push-ups. I got a steel mace, and I'm doing my 360s, not a lot of exercise. And then I would walk to campus, which is about a mile at the time. I said, I think this is what's going on. I do the ice bath. I do a little exercise. I think my testosterone's going through the roof because of I'm having the same effect that this study showed. Well, I wrote an article and nobody paid any attention to the article, Logan, because, I put it up on Morozko Forge and Google hates us and nobody's really finding this article. But Jason said he'd try it out. Sure enough, he got his testosterone up to 990 the same way. We said, there might be something to this. And then I was in Iceland. This was with my girlfriend. So, this worked. I started dating. I met a beautiful lady. She's wicked smart. We're going to Iceland, and this is 2022. We're going to see the Northern Lights. And we get off the plane in Reykjavik, and my phone starts blowing up. People are like, Tom, you're on the Joe Rogan podcast. And I'm like, well, hang on. I think I would probably know if I was never a guest. Like, I've never met Joe Rogan, but he put my picture up on his podcast. He found this Instagram post because he's a Morozko customer. And it was like a few weeks after Liver King finally admitted that he was taking testosterone. And so it was a topic. He was talking with Derek, more plates, more dates. And then Goggins comes on and Rogan's like, there's this guy. And he does ice baths. And his testosterone went through the roof when he started doing exercise after his ice. So I thought I would give that a try. He never mentioned me by name, but my picture is up there. And guys paused it. And then they zoomed in. And then they found my Instagram. And then they found the article. And all of a sudden, web hits started going through the roof, and people started writing to me. And they said, I'm trying your protocol. I heard about it on Joe Rogan. And my testosterone numbers are going crazy. I'd say about 80% of the messages that I get from men and women now all over the world are saying, I've reversed the order. I used to do ice baths after my workout. Now I'm doing them before, just like Joe said he does. And my testosterone has jumped. Now, not everybody. So maybe 20% say, I'm not really getting the boost that you did. Am I doing something wrong? And the answer, I don't know, Logan. But when I finally went to the urologist and I said, look, these are my labs. I think my PSA is fine. What do you think? He thought I must be juicing. He was like, there is no way some fat 50-something-year-old guy is sitting at 1180 because he's about my age, And he said, I want to do another test, luteinizing hormone. He knew that if my testosterone was high and my luteinizing hormone was low, because luteinizing hormone signals the gonads to produce testosterone in men. He knew that if there was a discrepancy, then I'm juicing, like Liver King or something, right? No, luteinizing hormone came back and it was off the charts as well. Too high, out of range. So something is happening metabolically where the ice bath is boosting my mitochondria, boosting my insulin sensitivity. It's doing something in my body that signals my body has the energy it needs, the metabolism it needs to produce more testosterone. Testosterone is expensive to produce, and it can have some deleterious effects on the immune system. And so if you're not in the kind of metabolic shape that can afford to produce the testosterone, your body might back off. Most guys are seeing a boost, but not everybody. And I haven't teased out exactly why some guys aren't getting it. Vitamin D is important, zinc is important, magnesium is important. But the 80% of the people who are messaging me now, this has been a minor miracle for them. You feel better. You've got more energy. You're more competitive. You're willing to strive for those goals so that when you have low T, just feel like maybe they're not worth it. So that experience got me so curious about what is happening through the whole body. What's happening with cancer? Because I'm getting messages from people who are using cold to manage their inoperable, untreatable stage 4 cancer, and it's resolving. My girlfriend, whom I went to Iceland with, she had a growth on her tumor. Can't treat it with chemo, can't operate on she had a tumor on her liver. You can't operate on the liver because it's so full of blood vessels and it might bleed out. She has a history of bleeding disorders. Chemo isn't going to touch it. She used ice baths and keto. She shrunk that growth. Now she still has to keep an eye on it. So it's rheumatoid arthritis. I started learning about autoimmune disorders and the way that people are resolving chronic pain and inflammation using ice baths. I finally got to this point, Logan. I wrote a book. There's like almost 400 pages in here about all the beneficial effects of ice baths, some of the risks and the dangers. And it's all rooted in the metabolism, including the people who have resolved major depression. Because if you have a metabolic dysfunction, your brain can't get the energy that it needs to maintain a good mood, to manage all the catastrophic thoughts that, might occur to you during the day. So when you start a regular program of cold water or cold plunge therapy, you stimulate mitobiogenesis, the production of new mitochondria. You improve your insulin sensitivity. You boost your metabolism, and everything in your body and your life begins to get better. In short, in a nutshell, that's my story and how I went from engineering and environmental engineering, civil engineering, to metabolism and making machines that allow people to improve their health.
That's quite the journey. I want to start by just kind of commending you about being open and transparent, just honest about your personal journey, because I think that's how we connect with people. Because everybody's going through something, all right? Like everybody is going through some sort of adversity, difficult situation, and for me, with can relate on the seeing our babies go through something. Me with cancer, you with type 1 diabetes. That's such an impact. It's a motivator for me. I think the quote from Napoleon Hill: "With every adversity, every hardship comes a seed of an equal or greater opportunity." And I can see a lot of that in your story. And so, the weight gain, the low testosterone. I worked on an ambulance for almost 8 years, and it destroyed my health. I had a low T at like 23. It was like 144 or something. It was crazy.
Wow.
And so, just the journey and the wake up call. But I want to, just commend you. I think that's a big deal. And I think that's why you resonate with so many people, is because you're honest about the life experiences we all have.
I know I don't have to tell you because you've been through this with your child, but I'll tell your listeners, I felt like a failure as a father. As a father, it's my job to protect and to provide. And I didn't know what was happening with my son. I didn't know what type 1 diabetes was. My wife, she was the one who called the pediatrician. And this doctor, he's our neighbor. He lives like right next door. And I remember her on the phone, like this is before mobile phones, and she's saying, "Well, John, he has a slight fever and, he's tired and he seems really sick." John's like, give him some rest or something going around. My wife says, "And he's peeing the bed a lot." Now, she didn't tell me what John said. He was like, "Meet me in the hospital right away. Your son has diabetes." And she didn't want to say that. Like for her, it was the catastrophe, right? And diabetes is easy to manage. And now we have so many tools. But at that moment, I felt like, how could I not know this? How could I have failed my son? He was hours away from ketoacidosis and entering a coma. They admit him right into the ICU. And as soon as they put him on an insulin drip, it was like watching him come back to life. That shame, I don't think it's ever going to leave me, that I felt, because I would much rather that this was my diagnosis. This was my disease. Shoot, I can stick needles in my stomach or something like that. To have to go through it with a child is a really, a vulnerable thing for a man. And it is way more motivating because most men, okay, so I'll speak for myself. You care much more about the well-being of your children than you do about yourself. I'm not saying this is the right way to do it, because if we don't take care of ourselves, how can we possibly take care of our kids? And the example that I wound up setting for my kids about health, it really wasn't the best, but I became so focused on his metabolism. I had trainers for him, for all three of my kids. I was so focused on their physical fitness and their diet because, of course, I thought I was going to heal my own shame by setting up an environment to keep my kids healthy. I had no idea what I was really doing, Logan. It took years for me to come around to the fact that I have to take care of myself as an example to my children so that when they grow up, they take care of themselves
Yeah,
too.
absolutely. I think that's a beautiful point. I can relate so much to everything you just said. And honestly, the more I understand, and I think we're well over 100 episodes with just experts in different fields. The more that I know how responsible I am, even though I wasn't, I didn't know, right? But still responsible, because what I am finding is that essentially every chronic disease or even genetic disease that is younger, say like a type 1 diabetes, is still epigenetic, right? It's environmental, and it may be environmental and manifest in an epigenetic way. And so that for cancer, the type 1 diabetes, I think that there's so much of the environment that plays into that. So Dr. Jack Kruse is the one that really just rang my bell as I was diving in his work with light and circadian rhythm. But one thing that he talks a whole lot about is cold thermogenesis protocol that he has and he incorporates. And that led me to your work and some of my friends' podcasts that you've been on. And so trying to wrap my mind around that, it actually clicked when you were talking to, I believe it was Max, and you talked about the ancestral experience of cold through, say, the Ice Age in a low population. So reiterate that. Tell me that story about how cold was a part of the human experience.
When you think about evolution, that is our ancestors, and what was the environment that they experienced? Logan, hot running water that you and I take for granted, how old is that? Like 100 years? We have a shower in the morning and we're like, oh yeah, this is good. I got a nice flow off my shower. My grandparents, they didn't know what a hot shower was when they were kids. Like, we have all of these modern conveniences that keep us comfortable. We got heated leather seats in our SUV. My grandfather, he grew up in Maine, and to him, like, a power lawnmower was technology. It is very recent that we have been separated from our natural environment. So let's think back to our ancient ancestors, long before our grandparents and our great grandparents. And it's not that very far back when you see that people were in touch with their environment and it wasn't comfortable. That discomfort was something that was a threat, but it was also what helped them be strong. So we're going to think about this. I learned in high school biology that the way children are born is sexual reproduction, right? You have the chromosomes from the father and chromosomes from the mother, and they make a new being. It forms the DNA in the nucleus, and from there, a child develops. What I never learned is that the mitochondria have their own DNA. Somehow we skipped that chapter in my high school biology book. The mitochondria are organelles outside the nucleus, but inside the cells, and they have their own DNA, and it is inherited exclusively from the mother. Now, there are mutations and there are sort of abnormalities, but for the most part, exclusively from the mother. What that means is our mitochondria DNA, they change much more slowly than the DNA in the nucleus. So if we're going to go back 10,000 years or 70,000 years to find those ancestors, we have essentially the same mitochondrial DNA that they have. And what kind of environment did they live in? It was the Ice Age, Logan. The oldest human fossil records are found in East Africa. And you might say, well, that's warm. That's equatorial. But what mountain does Wim Hof, take his trainees up shirtless? That's Kilimanjaro, which is on the equator. There are 4 modern glaciers on the equator in East Africa. So if you go back 70,000 years to this acute ice age, some volcano erupts and it's winter because the ash blocks out the sun. Our ancient ancestors eked out an existence on the edge of the water. We are an aquatic species, and that water was cold. If you weren't adapted, I'm talking about not you personally, but your ancient ancestors to the ice age. If you weren't adapted to the cold water and gathering the fish and the mussels and the whatever else it was to keep yourself and your family alive, then you didn't reproduce. Our bodies carry the ancestral expectation of cold water. And when we don't get, it doesn't matter what color skin or where you live now, because our evolutionary history was shaped by those cold water bottlenecks. We all need cold. And if you don't get it, then it is no wonder that you eventually lapse into a state of disease. Your body is built for exercise. It is built for sunlight. It is built for darkness. It is built for rest. It is built for all of these environmental variations. And it is also built for hot and cold. If you don't get any of these, if you don't get enough sun, if you don't get enough exercise, if you don't get enough sleep, if you don't get enough dark, if you don't get enough heat, if you don't get enough cold, you get sick. And one of the places in which you get sick is the metabolism. And there's a good reason for it. Brown fat, which exists in all infants, is the site of non-shivering thermogenesis. So we've all experienced where our muscles will shiver, or our teeth will chatter or something, and that's to warm us up. But infants don't have muscles that are mature enough to keep them warm in the cold. So instead, they have brown fat. And gradually, we lose that brown fat. It is brown fat that is activated by the cold. Your mitochondria will produce heat from blood glucose and from stored lipids, and that's what keeps you warm. Eventually, we lose so much brown fat that doctors used to believe that human adults just didn't have any. It was only a thing that you had in childhood, and then it sort of disappeared. But that turns out that wasn't true either. There was a team in Sweden, and this is something around 2007, 2008, and they were noticing on PET scans, which is used to identify tumors, they were noticing areas that would light up. Actually, the opposite, that would become dark, that weren't tumors. They were symmetrical, and they were around the collarbone and a little bit around the heart. And they said, what do you think that is? And one of the Swedes says, I think it's brown fat, because these PET scans identify tumors that preferentially uptake glucose. They rely on glucose metabolism. So they inject you with a radioactive tracer that is attached to glucose. That goes through your bloodstream. Then you get into the PET scan and says, where's this radioactive glucose going? They know it's going to go to the tumor. And so the tumor sort of becomes a dark spot. But they were noticing all these symmetrical spots that couldn't be tumors. They said, I think that's brown fat, because these instrument rooms, they're cold. That is, the machine generates so much heat, they have to cool the instrument room for the machine to work. And about 5% of the people who were getting these PET scans showed up positive for brown fat. It turns out that we are meant to retain brown fat into adulthood. And the only reason that we don't is because we're not getting enough cold, and so we lose it. But brown fat is not just for non-shivering thermogenesis. It is an essential secretory organ. It is in constant communication with the thyroid to regulate metabolism. Brown fat, for example, will convert thyroid hormone from a less active form to a more active form. And so in this way, brown fat is more responsible for active thyroid hormone than even the thyroid is. So they're constantly signaling one another. And if you lose all your brown fat, which can take years, your thyroid has nothing to work with. There's nothing modulating it. And so no wonder that you get either hyper or hypothyroidism, because your thyroid's out of control. That makes your metabolism go out of whack. And fortunately, you can restore brown fat in your body. It only takes about a couple of weeks. Regular cold exposure, cryo is good. Cold plunge therapy is good. This signals your body to beige white fat cells. That is, stimulates mitobiogenesis, the production of new mitochondria in these fat cells that will empower them to do non-shivering thermogenesis again. And they do the same thing. that the brown fat that you were born with does. It's like restoring you to that youthful condition that you had with a kid or as a kid, where you're telling your mom, I'm not cold. And she's like, put on a jacket, put on a scarf. And you're like, I'm fine, Mom. I'm going to go play in the snow. Because you've got plenty, kids know when they're cold. They've got plenty of brown fat to protect them against that. And they'd much rather have a great time. You don't get a lot of snow in Little Rock, but if you do, a kid's going to want to go outside and, throw some snowballs at his friends, and let him do it because he's or she is well protected. Adults can restore that feeling of youth that they get from
So I've got four kids ranging from 3 to 10, and the boy, girl, so 2 and 2. But as we've gone through diving more and more, I just question about everything that we've been told. And so the brown fat component is really intriguing to me, and especially with the concentration at birth, and then it depletes if we're not exposed to cold. And so it's my understanding that the brown fat name comes from more highly dense mitochondria. But do you know if there's any sort of a melanin connection? I've not been able to find it as I've researched. But, again, with Jack's big push on melanin, I can't help but think that there's got to be some sort of a melanin connection there.
I haven't seen that either. And when I first started out, I used to confuse melanin and melatonin. I'm like, they sound so similar, And so I really had to sit down and sort this out. What is melanin? What is melatonin? Melanin will absorb the UVA and UVB light in the sun to protect your skin cells from genetic damage that can't be repaired with too much UV. And so Jack will talk about build your solar callus, so that your skin is attuned to the sun exposure that your body needs. That's melanin. Melatonin, which you weren't asking about, but turns out to be really important. Melatonin is the original reactive oxygen species scavenger. So the reactive oxygen species are sort of these stray charge. That is, when your mitochondria are working really hard, they don't produce energy, they convert it. They take it from one form, blood glucose or lipids, and they make a different form, ATP, that your muscles can use, that other cells can use. So they aren't the batteries so much as they are like an engine. They convert one type of chemical energy to another. But along the way, you have to imagine that there are these metaphorical sparks. When the mitochondria are working too hard, they will produce reactive oxygen species. Those reactive oxygen species, they're looking for stray electrons. And one place they might find them is in the mitochondrial DNA. They will damage the mitochondrial DNA. And typically this is temporary. You exercise too hard, you do too much cold, you overwork your mitochondria, you eat too many carbs, you get this temporary ROS, reactive oxygen species effect, damage the mitochondrial DNA, and that's fine because your body has mechanisms. The ROS will also signal mitophagy, the destruction of damaged mitochondria, and mitobiogenesis, the production of new ones. If you never get a rest, if you never give your mitochondria a break, then they'll never come back from the stress. It is melatonin that sacrifices itself to scavenge these reactive oxygen species so they don't damage the mitochondrial DNA. Melatonin is produced inside the mitochondria. They produce their own. There's no way that the pineal gland, for example, which will also produce melatonin and help govern your circadian rhythm, can produce enough and get it to where it needs to be in the cells of the body to protect the mitochondria. So the mitochondria produce their own. And this is a new revelation. They produce it to protect themselves from the damage. And when the melatonin is exhausted within the mitochondria, that's when the ROS will begin to damage the mitochondrial DNA. So there are three pathways to mitochondrial damage. And one of them is to screw up your light exposure. Because if you screw up your melatonin production, you will leave your mitochondria vulnerable. Another one is you never give your mitochondria a rest from these concentrated carbohydrates. So too many carbohydrates in your diet without a break. It's okay to have a piece of banana bread or something like this. And then you're going to fast or you're going to go keto and you'll give your mitochondria a break and they will come back. But if you are chronic carbs all the time, like many Americans are, you're going to mess up your mitochondria. This is why type 2 diabetes can be reversed with a ketogenic diet or with intermittent fasting, because type 2 diabetes is associated with mitochondrial dysfunction. When you give the mitochondria a break and you allow them to repair themselves, the type 2 diabetes can resolve. The third way is seed oils. Seed oils are a source of energy, like all fats are, and they can be metabolized. But what most people don't realize is that the membranes of every cell in your body are made up of lipids. And there's a certain profile of those lipids. That is, fat is also a building block for the structural material of the cell. And when you give it the wrong building blocks, it builds the wrong membrane. So too much of the seed oils, the linoleic acid, the omega-6s rather than the omega-3, it messes up the membrane. And this interferes with transport of protons and charge and those things that must cross the membrane, the chemicals responsible for metabolism in your body. So these are the three pathways: the seed oils, the relentless high carb diets, and the poor light hygiene that can result in mitochondrial dysfunction. How do you fix it? Well, get your circadian rhythm right. Get seed oils out of your diet. Give your body a break from the carbs, whether that's intermittent fasting or intermittent keto. Give your body healthy carbs that it has time to process. Your mitochondria will be restored. Your insulin sensitivity will be restored.
Yeah, again, there's a lot to unpack there, my friend. I'm glad you
You will
brought up
have more
melatonin, actually,
energy.
because on the cancer topic, that very well may be one of the most important things that we can look at. So, very deep into the alternative cancer world. That's where I spend a huge amount of my time. Consultations, oncologists, and stuff like that that are practicing in ways that, we get told regularly don't work, but they do. The melatonin studies and things that have come out with Dr. Russell Ryder, Scott Zimmerman, those guys are absolutely incredible. And so, again, anecdotally, all the it's not double blinded, whatever nonsense. The use of high dose melatonin is absolutely helping cancer patients. Like that's really not a debatable topic. But I also get and understand Dr. Cruz's point of if we produce it endogenously, we shouldn't be supplementing with it, at least I think in a metabolically healthy state. So the melatonin being produced by the mitochondria and having a positive impact on cancer is something that we should all at least be aware of and be able to dive into. The carbs and the seed oil thing, I think you're spot on. I think that's a huge part of it. I think a massive issue there too that kind of gets not talked about is deuterium. I mean, the carbs, the sugars, and the seed oils are absolute deuterium bombs. Destroys the mitochondria. I mean, it just completely wrecks ATP synthase, and so all of that is so important. So tie in this mitochondrial destruction based off the lifestyles that we choose to live, um, and how brown fat, especially with that thyroid axis, I think that's incredible, that connection you've made there. How is brown fat really a solution, right? The cold therapy being the tool to create brown fat. How is that a solution for the destructive mitochondrial practices that we live every day?
Okay, we're going to step through some of this slow, because I got to admit to you, Logan, that I only understand like 30% of what Jack says. But most of it goes over my head, right? And so I start from the assumption that Jack Cruz is right, and I just don't understand what the hell he's talking about, you know? And I know I'm not alone in that. So there's no shame in it. It's difficult to decode because he is thinking about things on a level that is more complex than my brain can typically get my head around. Deuterium is one of them. In that Max Gulhane podcast, Max, a terrific host, and he asked me if I knew anything about deuterium. No, because it's another one of those things. I'm an engineer, and thank goodness I don't have the disadvantage of going to pill school and being a medical doctor, but neither did I have like the microbiology class that teaches me about whatever Jack is talking about. Here's what I've gathered. There are two ways that charge moves through the body. We all understand electrons because there's a good analogy. If you've ever had an electric train when you were a kid and you create a short circuit and you see the sparks and you took the motor apart, that's a very engineering thing to do. And it's what I did, thank goodness. We understand the way charge moves with electrons, but there's also protons. Charge moves through the body in both forms, and the proton is particularly important. So how do you move a proton? A proton is so much larger than an electron. It has to move because it's a chemical, not just a charge. Deuterium is a proton attached to a neutron. And so it's a lot bigger, and it will not move through the cell membranes in the same way that a lone proton will move. So if you're going to take H3O, that's a water molecule with an extra proton on it and a positive charge. And it's a great way to move charge around. But if you put a neutron in there, now it's much heavier and it's much larger much more difficult to move, I should say, than the H3O that has a lower molecular weight. So this is as far as I've gotten in understanding the deuterium connection that Jack is trying to teach people, that there's a physical difference between the way charge moves in a deuterium particle that a deuterium molecule than in a proton that doesn't have a neutron attached. And there are other things that I understand much better than that. This is coming from Thomas Seyfried's work, because mitochondria is what is converting energy. The charge transport is incredibly important to the function of the mitochondria. It is in the mitochondria in which cancer originates. This is what Seyfried revealed. Without worrying about the specific mechanism or the way that deuterium can interfere, he takes this cancer cell with defective nucleic DNA, and he will remove the DNA. And he'll put it in a healthy cell with good mitochondria. He'll say, I'm going to put cancerous DNA into a cell with healthy mitochondria. And guess what? The mitochondria provides the cell with the energy it needs to repair the defective DNA. Cancer does not originate in defects in the DNA in the nucleus. It originates in defects in the mitochondria. And the healthy mitochondria can repair those defects that are characteristic of cancer in the nucleus. Brown fat, as you pointed out, is dense packed with mitochondria. It is cold that stimulates mitobiogenesis. So cold plunge therapy is a mitochondrial therapy. All life is energy. And this is a big advantage to being an engineer, because thermodynamics is not easy. And the typical medical doctor is not understanding it, but we all have to take it as an engineer. One of the ways that James Lovelock advised NASA to look for life on other planets was to just sample the atmosphere remotely. He says, you want to know if there's life on Jupiter? Look at the atmosphere. If it's at equilibrium, if it's at chemical equilibrium, you know there is no life, because life is a constant flow of energy that can only exist in a state of disequilibrium. No life flow, no energy flow, no life. And it is the mitochondria that are responsible, that modulate that energy flow. So mitochondria are life. Mitochondria is the key to anti-aging. And I know that there's telomere length, and I know that there's like epigenetic markers. None of these are any good. They do not improve on predictions of mortality any better than chronological age. So I don't really care what, Brian Johnson is measuring, or you can buy a bunch of like DNA methylation tests online, and they're sort of interesting. But the mitochondria are the secret to, are the key to energy, and that is the secret to anti-aging. So why is brown fat so important? Brown fat is packed with mitochondria. Brown fat is what produces the neuroprotective factors like FGF21, like brain-derived neuroprotective factor is associated with activation of brown fat. They keep your brain healthy. Brown fat keep your metabolism healthy. And those metabolic functions are essential to a healthy, energetic life. I'm not sure I addressed all your questions, and you really got to have Jack on to speak for himself. But I'm trying to attach here the mitochondrial health to the overall, the systemic health of the body, because some people will say, nah, that Professor Seager, he's full of crap. He makes ice baths sound like it's some kind of miracle, and they are too good to be true. But the pharmaceutical companies have taught us that you have one pill for one ailment, and then there are side effects. And this is bullcrap. This is how people wind up taking 12 pills, 6 for these different kinds of ailments, and then 4 more to like deal with the side effects for the first 6 that they're taking. And the next thing you know, you're up to your eyeballs in drugs. Cruz says, and I think he has a good point, if you can make it, you don't need to take it. And there are a few instances in which I disagree. If you're suffering from a vitamin D insufficiency or a deficiency, then take the vitamin D. Like, deal with the acute issue right away, and then get the sunshine that you need to restore health. Then give your body the environment that it needs to heal. The point being that I'm not trying to speak for Jack. That when we put our body in the environment that allows to heal itself, we shouldn't need the melatonin supplements. We shouldn't need the vitamin D supplements. We shouldn't need the magnesium supplements because we're getting enough in our diet. And few of us really exist in that environment. If you don't get enough exercise, you get sick. They can't put exercise in a pill. If you don't get enough sunlight, you get sick. You can't put sunlight in, well, there are limitations to the extent to which you can put sunlight in a pill. If you don't get enough cold, you get sick. And you can't put cold in a pill. I don't know. I might not have addressed where you were going, Logan. My point is that I agree with Jack. You've got to create the conditions in which the body can heal itself. And sometimes that requires a supplement or a boost or a kickstart.
But, you bring up something that I have really seen that I think is a super, super important topic. So basically, in my literal just over 100 interviews with people, in my opinion, Jack has the largest picture of this puzzle. Now, he doesn't go the deepest in some of the areas for me to level up, right? I don't think Jack needs to dumb it down so Logan can understand it. I think I need to understand it going that way. And your approach with diving deeper into that aspect but still relating it without ego is beautiful. And that's the other thing that I've seen in these negatives is we have so many in the academic or scientific world that have these egos that they absolutely hate somebody else and therefore their work has no significance. And I think that's trash. I don't think that's helping any of us. And so, I just want to, I appreciate you for taking, it doesn't matter if we love Jack Cruz or don't, or any other, PhD doctor, whatever. It's about how can we apply these principles to be able to help other people. And again, I think Jack has the biggest picture put together. The cold thermogenesis that you have put together, and not only that, you have taken the tool to say, here you go. You don't even have to reinvent the wheel. It's like if you have a natural way of doing it, do it. If you don't, here is the solution. So go into what you've done on the solution side of being able to package it and still be open-minded and continue to try to improve. Tell us about Morozko.
I had an experience of all places in a dentist's office. When I was a kid, they used to have these magazines and you could color and you could, I don't know, these games in the dentist's office, Highlights magazine, right? And I don't know if they still have that, but I was with my kids and there's Reader's Digest. And so I'm thumbing through the Reader's Digest while my kids are at the dentist. And there was an article on vitamin D deficiency, insufficiency, and type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disorder. Type 2 diabetes is a metabolic dysfunction. That is a mitochondrial dysfunction. It's reparable. But type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disorder in which the body attacks the islet cells in the pancreas that are responsible for insulin production, and it is irreversible. It is associated with a deficiency of vitamin C late in pregnancy and in the first year of life. And this was after my son's diagnosis, and it hit me like a ton of bricks because it was the first experience I had of really feeling betrayed. There was something I knew, like instinctively, that, my mother and the health establishments, and my parents went to Harvard, which is the epicenter of corrupt diet misinformation. And they came out of there thinking margarine is healthier than butter. They came out of there thinking that the sunlight is going to kill you with cancer. They came out of Harvard with so many misconceptions about health and diet that were passed on to me. I read that article in all places in Reader's Digest, and I felt that first feeling of being betrayed. So I had to go read the study. It was this long-term, like 2 decades study of Finnish mothers and their infants and their sun exposure and vitamin D supplementation. And this is how they created the association between vitamin D insufficiency in the first year of life and increased risk of type 1 diabetes. It turns out that there is a relationship between light, vitamin D, and cold that instinctively, or maybe perhaps I should say intuitively, makes all kinds of sense. These autoimmune disorders that are showing up like crazy, they originate in irregularities of vitamin D. Something about the body that is not producing the vitamin D because it doesn't have the sunlight in the wintertime at these, extreme latitudes, Finland, for example, will compensate because it's cold. You get some cold exposure and this regulates the immune system until you can get out to the light again. I began to question everything. And I still hear, those things that sound bizarre to me. And I'm going to make one up that actually makes a lot of sense. But if you hear somebody say, oh, yes, red light therapy will reduce blood sugar spikes by stimulating your mitochondria to convert glucose right out of your bloodstream. Now, you might say, that makes no sense. That's the most ridiculous thing I ever, and it turns out to be true. So I'm now at a point where I'm a total conspiracy theorist. Like, sign me up for all of this misinformation. I take something that sounds absurd and I say, well, what are they trying to get at? Maybe it's not 100% correct, but maybe there's a kernel of an idea in there in which I can learn, because the things that I was taught as a child, oh, you shouldn't eat the skin of the chicken. That's bad for you. Give me that chicken skin. That's where the collagen is, that's where the healthy fats are going to be found. Everything that, I'm going to exaggerate a little bit, Logan, but everything that I was taught as a child was a lie. And so I don't know what to believe or what not to believe anymore until I investigate it for myself. I don't care what your double-blind, randomized, gold standard, placebo-controlled trial says. The only thing that matters is your N=1 experience. If you found something that works for you, don't let anybody on Twitter tell you that it actually isn't working because they have a journal article that said that didn't happen. You've got to run your own experiments. You've got to find out what works for you. And then you might be able to uncover some of the mechanisms that could work, that explain how it's working and maybe lead to hypotheses for other people.
I think you make another phenomenal point. Ancestrally speaking, that's how we knew if something worked or not. And that's why it was passed down with traditions and everything. It was like we didn't wait for a study, 1,000, 2,000 years ago before we decided not to eat a poison mushroom, right? Like they did it, they died. We don't do that, right? So I think, again, I love it. I love the conversation. I love how you've taken it, and I appreciate the entrepreneurial side. So we know that cold you have sold me, right? Like I am a believer. I'm trying to incorporate it. I'm trying to learn. But as a newbie into this cold thermogenesis space, give us that kind of, how do you start? How do you apply this? And you not necessarily have to go to the extreme of getting a unit yet, but that makes a lot of sense once you get there. But how do we start applying these principles to our lives?
Well, now I'm remembering you asked me about Morozko. Morozko, it originated out of necessity. We could have created a company called, besticebathforyou.com or something that sounds totally Chinese, but we wanted a metaphor. Morozko is this winter warlock character in Russian folklore. And it's a story that's, intended to scare the children so they behave. Or Morozko's going to come get you and he's going to freeze you to death, if you're not a good child. But if you are good, if you meet your hardships with stoicism and grace, then Morozko will bestow upon you these magical powers. We love that metaphor of drawing strength from the hardship of the cold. Because let's face it, in Phoenix, it's 115 degrees. Let me check my computer. 103 degrees right now at 9:30 in the morning, and it's headed to 110. We have a deficit of cold exposure. The tap water is like 90 degrees right now. We measured in our production studio. So Jason and I, we needed a machine that would give us this cold. His wife, she suffered from Hashimoto's hypothyroiditis. She had no brown fat. She grew up in Florida, and then she lives in Phoenix. She started a program of cold exposure. She reversed her
Wow.
Hashimoto's, and now she's healthy because she restored brown fat and re-regulated her thyroid. But her first ice bath was like 11 seconds long because nobody wants to do this. I started with cold showers. It was the winter in Phoenix, and I hated it. But, I'd get in there, and I'd be like swearing up a storm, and they made me angry. There's a study out of Finland that says there's a difference between partial cold water immersion and whole body. Partial will activate your fight or flight response. So it will activate your sympathetic nervous system, and it will put you in that state of elevated emotion. It will never activate your parasympathetic. This is the rest and digest division of the central nervous system. You never get that calm that comes with doing the whole body, like up to your neck in the cold. That originates in the mammalian dive reflex. So you first get into the cold and you instant panic, get me out of here, we're going to die. But this mammalian dive reflex will take over when you're doing whole body. About 15 to 30 seconds later, your heart rate goes down, your oxygen consumption rate goes down, even though your metabolism is revving up. Your body says, all right, we got to conserve energy. He's probably he's going to go get some lobsters for the family. He's going to need to conserve the breath. You structure your breathing. You calm everything down. We've got brainwave data on this, and your brain will involuntarily go into a more meditative state because your body doesn't know what you got to do. Maybe you got to go snatch some fish or something like this. That dive reflex creates a state of meditative calm that I couldn't get because I suck at meditation. The breath work bores me. And I know that the ice bath is a shortcut to this mental state, but it works for me. So we had to invent an ice bath. Now, if you live in, I don't know, Wisconsin, my mother grew up in Maine. And if I had said to her, Mom, you really ought to do ice baths, she said, no way. I got enough cold when I was a kid. She and my parents were born in the Depression. They're like, we've had enough hardship, and I can't blame them. But for me, it was a way of reintroducing cold that allowed me to live in the desert without this dysfunction, this metabolic injury. Well, after I started doing it every day, Logan, I'm not going to go down to the Quickie Mart and buy 100 pounds of ice. Like, it turns out the Morozko was a really good return on investment, because I'm going to pop in for like 2 minutes. I go very cold, about 34 degrees, and I do 2 to 4 minutes, and I do it every day, sometimes in the summer, twice a day. And I want it when I want it. Like, I don't want to have to, spend 45 minutes to prepare and then pour the ice into the tub or something like that. You don't need to go every day, not for the metabolic benefits. If you get seasonal cold exposure, then you're going to recruit some brown fat. It takes months, if not years, to lose the brown fat. So we are tuned to that sort of seasonal cycle as far as our metabolism goes. But for the mental benefits, I need it all the time. Because once I've started my day with something that's really hard, and I've sort of conquered the difficulty of that, the anxiety, it just dissolves into the water. The catastrophic thoughts that often plague my mind, they disappear, because the cold snaps me to my present moment. And the whole rest of the day, like, what bad thing can happen? I feel like Superman, I can deal with everything, because I just did 4 minutes in my Morozko, and I was staring down at that ice, and there was no part of me that wanted to get in there, and I did it anyway. So it's the psychological benefits that really motivate me to keep it up. If what you're going for is metabolism, your neighbors might think you're crazy, but just go out for a walk with no shirt on in the wintertime. Get a little chill on. People say, well, how should I start? How cold should it be? Here's a rule of thumb. Go cold enough to gasp, and then long enough to shiver. If you don't feel that gasp reflex when you first get into it, it's not cold enough. And if when just starting out, if you don't feel a little shiver, stay in a little longer. After you're acclimated, you will still feel the gasp reflex, but you might not shiver. Your brown fat is doing its job. And I don't want you to stay in there for half an hour just so you start shivering. So these are some of the rules of thumb. There are 100 ways to start. Some people will go to cryotherapy. They don't want to get wet. And so they'll go into, the liquid nitrogen cryotherapy thing. I thought that was boring, because the air just doesn't suck the heat out of you like the cold water does. But if it works for you, I'm not going to criticize you for it. There's 100 ways to get going. Cold enough to gasp, long enough to shiver when you're starting out.
Wonderful, wonderful, and simple. I think that whole embrace nature and the cyclical aspects of how the world works, for most of us, especially in temperate climates. You said something in there that jogged my memory. I was talking with my oldest son, and he was telling a story about how, I was stressed out at that point and I wasn't doing something right. And he's like, that's because you were low dopamine dad. And so it really just took me off guard. I wasn't expecting, because it's crazy what kids pick up with. So go into a little bit as we wrap up the dopamine connection with cold and why that's important, why dopamine is a massive, massive component that we need to pay attention to.
With the caveat that I am not the dopamine expert. Huberman and Anna Lemke, I think they've done a podcast on it, and there are so many people who know more about dopamine than I do. However, there was a study done in the Czech Republic. Huberman loves to cite it, and that's the study that says cold water immersion gives you a 250%. This is like 3.5 times the level of dopamine. It's true. There are other studies that look at these neurotransmitters and hormones that are produced as a result of cold water immersion, and they can create in you a feeling of euphoria. So at Morozko, we have what's called the ecstatic guarantee. It's not a satisfaction guarantee. You will be ecstatic with your purchase, and can say that because as soon as you get out of your first ice bath, you're going to feel that dopamine. You're going to feel that norepinephrine and that epinephrine rush, but you're also going to feel the oxytocin and the vasopressin that is produced. There are, according to Helen Fisher, 3 brain systems of love. There's like romantic love, and there's familial love like you would have for your kids, and then there's just straight up lust, and all of these can be activated in the ice bath. One of the things that happens particularly for women is they get a testosterone boost. They don't even need to exercise. Men need to exercise afterwards. But women, only about a quarter of their testosterone is produced in the ovaries. The skin produces some testosterone, the adrenals produce some testosterone, the fat cells produce some testosterone. And what better way to stimulate a woman's skin and fat and adrenals than an ice bath? So she gets in, she's going to get testosterone right away. Men, they produce testosterone principally in their testes, and they've got to get some exercise, restore that blood flow afterwards. Well, testosterone is the lust hormone, Logan. So it's not just dopamine. It's also the testosterone, the vasopressin, the oxytocin. It is impossible to be in a bad mood when all of these neurotransmitters and hormones are like coursing through your body after 3 minutes in the ice bath. This is one of the ways that an ice bath will help resolve major depression when it doesn't respond to talk therapy and it doesn't respond to SSRIs. And then someone will join like a winter swimming club and they'll go to the beach and they'll play around in the wave and they'll come out and be, I feel fantastic. I love you people. You're the best friends I've ever had. It's that feeling is those neurotransmitters acting on their brain. The ice bath is like a love potion. And when you experience cold exposure with other people as a group, you feel bonded to them in a way that you can't be in a bad mood. Now, give it a few hours and it lasts for hours, which is wonderful, without the type of hangover that you might experience if you're administering an exogenous drug that gets you the diabetes. But it's not no hangover. My daughter texted me, she's now in her 20s, and she said, Dad, I went to the Blink concert last night. I was right on the barricade. It was amazing. She experienced all the same neurotransmitters, the bonding experience with her friends, right? She fell in love in all of these different brains. And then the next day she's like, I'm so depressed. She calls it the dopamine hangover, because she wants her life to be like that all the time. The difference between going to the concert and getting that, euphoric dope hit and doing the ice bath is she didn't play the instrument. She didn't do the hard work. She enjoyed the concert, but she didn't overcome the anxiety because the anxiety wasn't there. When you get into the ice bath, it's like you've earned it, Logan. You did the hard thing. You earned that feeling. And it's no surprise that the next day, you want it again. But when you're staring down at that ice, you're like, yeah, I want that feeling, that ecstatic sensation. But I don't want to get into that. You've got to earn it all over again. And this is why Huberman, he had David Goggins on his podcast. Goggins is the one who was like on the Joe Rogan show, when Joe was saying, hey, there's this guy on testosterone, he's talking to Goggins. So Goggins comes on Huberman's podcast, and Huberman said, I've been saving this up for you. It is the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And it took me a week to practice that so I could say it on this is really big anatomical term. He goes, it only grows in your brain when you do the difficult things, when you do the things that you hate doing. And Goggins is like an expert in doing things that suck. And Huberman says it is this anterior mid-cingulate cortex where willpower resides. It may be the site of the will to live. So that ecstatic feeling that you get from the ice bath requires you to do this really hard thing that creates a physiological change in your brain that empowers you to do more really hard things, at least to the research that Huberman has read. It is no wonder, that I'm going to go back there. I'm going to seek those neurotransmitters again. I'm going to get into that super cold water that I've talked to all of the elite athletes tell me they don't want to do it. The worst part of the ice bath is the 15 minutes right before you did the ice bath. And Joe Rogan, he's posted the same thing. He's like, there's no part of me that wants to get in here, but that's why I do it. When you get out and you have that ecstatic sensation, you don't want to let it go. You want to earn it over and over again. And I'm no dopamine expert, but I think that is a healthy thing. It has been working for me.
I love that. I absolutely love it. All right. Well, as we wrap up here, just want to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me. And where do we go to learn more about your work, what you're doing? At some point, I want to follow up on the whole green light. I think that's fascinating. But for now, where do we go to get the book? How do we go check out your incredible company?
Everything that I've ever written on cold is available for free at morozkoforge.com. And it's crazy, Logan. Sometimes my competitors will send me an email and they'll say, "Oh, that was a great article. Thanks for putting up that great content." And I'm like, "What?" And then I'll see some version of, like, some AI translates my article and puts it up on their website and stuffs it with keywords, and they rank even higher than me. But I'm a scientist. ASU pays me to create knowledge. And I have it in my head that the knowledge should be for free. So you can go to morozkoforge.com, you go on the science tab, all the articles are there. But if you need it, like, I don't know, you want to read it on the plane or something, if you need it to put you to sleep at night, you can buy the book. It's not on Amazon. Like, people write to me and say, "I couldn't find your book." That's because I didn't send it to Amazon. Me and AJ, we just self-published it. We'll get there eventually, but you can buy the book on there. And of course, you can buy a $12,000 ice bath. And some people say that's ridiculous. I could build the same thing for $2,000. And you probably could. Like, you could get 80% of a Morozko in your backyard. But we don't sell, wood and metal and wiring. The knowledge in what to do with the material is really what we're selling. We're selling the convenience to people who don't want to DIY, who don't want to have to figure it out for themselves. So, Morozko, it's pretty expensive and it's not for everybody. If you need the knowledge and you just want to fool around with yourself, then don't buy one. It's okay. Read the book. Start your practice. And when you're ready to say, "I want this every day, I want to be able to microdose the cold, I want to be able to do it 3 times a day," then you'll come and you'll say, "I'm ready for the Morozko now."
I love it. I absolutely love it. Thank you so much. You're helping me connect even more dots. The work I think that you're doing is phenomenal. And again, appreciate your time.
This has been a pleasure, Logan. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us in the Sowing Prosperity mission. If you like this content, like and subscribe, share with your friends. Be sure to check out sowingprosperity.com. Sign up for the email. We've got so much more work to do.